Students, so I can't get my face to come up here, but that's okay. I want to go through the constitutional amendments here with you. We're only going to go through the first 10 amendments. The first 10 amendments are the concessions, the compromise that was made, known as the Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments added to the Constitution in order to get the Constitution passed. So we're talking like 1791. We start hammering out a constitution years earlier, but before it actually gets ratified, it needs to have, this Bill of Rights, really that the anti-federalists were pushing for, because they said it was about preserving the liberties and the freedom of the people. And so once they got the Bill of Rights passed, we know that now we need 2/3 of a vote in Congress to pass on an amendment, and you need 3/4 of the states to ratify it. So constitutional amendments can be made to the Constitution, but it takes quite a bit. It's better than the Articles of Confederation, but you can't easily change the Constitution, and that's a good thing. It's not meant to be changed whatever party is in power, or whoever might feel like they have a right to change something, or they have a better idea. It takes a lot of compromise to do it. So I want to start with what our Mr. Rusted, and if any of you are familiar with the history of Shanley and the Social Studies Department, Mr. Rusted, Randall Rusted, started these constitutional amendment shortcuts, we call them. And when you get to Mrs. Brock next year, even Mrs. Brock will just refer to them as the shortcuts. So if you go around school and you hear people saying, freedoms, guns, troops, warrants, silence, attorney, $20, punishment, unenumerated rights, state powers, state powers, that's the last one, they're kind of just spilling these out. So the first is to just know the shortcuts. Know how the shortcuts are, freedoms, guns, troops, warrants, silence, just those basic. But you also need to kind of be able to understand these and know what they mean. So when we talk about freedoms, we're talking about these RAPs: religion, the freedom to religion, assembly, petition, press, and speech. And I think it's pretty easy to understand that. Think even way back to the John Peter Zenger trial, when we had the freedom of speech, the freedom of press. You can now worship in any religion that you want to, or not worship. That's a really important part. You don't have to be a part of a religion. And think about how, the puritanical faith, how Puritans were very much, John Winthrop, City on a Hill, that they believed that everybody should be of a religious faith. Well, the First Amendment, right, says that you don't actually have to practice a religion, and if you do, you can practice it anyway that it does not infringe on other people's rights. Guns. This is the right to bear arms. Now, with limits. The wording is that we would have a well-regulated militia. Now, partly what I want to say, and this is a real hot button topic, especially here in areas like North Dakota, where there's lots of hunters and a lot of gun ownership, actually. What I do need you to know is that these amendments were created to protect citizens from the government, not the other way around. They were not meant to protect the government from citizens. So guns with limits can be owned, but it doesn't say that guns can't be owned. So what I want you to realize is that this is not a stipulation that you can't own a gun. It's a stipulation that the government cannot take your gun. Troops. This comes way back to when you don't have to quarter or house troops. And if you think about the Quartering Act, it makes a lot of sense why this would be one of those top amendments that they want to add, because they just felt it was not right that you had to quarter troops. Think about way back in when I think that was 1765. Warrants. This says that there can be no illegal search or seizure. also kind of hearkening back to before the revolution, they were really upset about those customs officials. Remember when the customs officials could just kind of, for no apparent reason, go through your merchandise or your goods or supplies or whatever, and tax you and subject you to fines because maybe they didn't like you or whatever it happened to be. So you need probable cause, and you cannot illegally search or seize anybody's property without a good reason, without probable cause. Silence, we talk about this at Shanley as GED, G-E-D-D. The first part of silence is grand jury, and basically a grand jury just says, is there enough evidence against like a person or a group or whatever it is to even go to trial? You know, we want to support people's rights, and if it's a waste of everybody's time and energy and maybe government money, then why would we go through this whole process? So there has to be enough evidence to even go to trial. Eminent domain is that the government can take your property, but they can't just take it because they want it. They have to have good reason for it, just compensation for the common good. Meaning you have to, if the government for some reason, and this has happened a lot in Fargo, I know it was a big issue as the diversion project and the Red River diversion was happening down south, the government can say, you have to move, you have to leave your property, but they have to do it because it's for the good of other people. It's to protect flooding in other areas along the Red. They can't just do it for no reason, and they have to pay you for it. They have to pay you a just compensation, what would be privy to what today's market could buy. Double jeopardy is that you can't be charged with the exact same crime twice. If you are charged with it once, you can't be charged with it again. It would be another charge, but it would have to be something different. So freedoms, guns, troops, warrants, silence, attorney. An attorney, there's a lot here that we should talk about, but they all kind of make sense if you think of them more actually as one. We talk about you have the right to an attorney, and you have the right to have like a jury trial. We'll talk about how a jury will be presented if you need one, and an attorney will be provided if you can't afford one. Part of the issue for attorney is that when people were, colonists were being accused and charged with whatever crime it might have been in the colonies before they became the United States, they were often sent to Great Britain for their offenses. And then they would not have a jury of their peers. It would often not be an impartial jury. And sometimes they wouldn't even be able to really face their accuser. So the idea is you get to face the person who is saying you've done something wrong has to look you in the eye, has to be in the same room. You have the right to face your accuser in front of a jury of your peers. And a jury of your peers means those who live in the same area as you, those who experience the same thing as you. It's why it was very difficult to find impartial jurors in the Derek Chauvin case, because everybody knew about that, and they had already kind of made a judgment before. And so it was, you have to be in front of a jury of your peers, and that jury has to make the best decision, being unbiased. You have to have an impartial jury. You have the right to a speedy trial, but in all honesty, a speedy trial today could take years. You know, Derek Chauvin is contesting part of his charges, and the trial is still kind of going on. So he's already been convicted of some charges, but he is refuting other charges. And so speedy trial is a subjective word. You have the right to a public trial. The public should be kept well informed, and it should be held in the area where the crime was committed. There was a lot of talk again about the Derek Chauvin trial, that they wanted to move it to Moorhead area because they needed to get out of the Minneapolis area because of the intensity of people's feelings on one side or the other. They ultimately had it in the Minneapolis area because they felt like moving it to Moorhead would have just been too far out of the public's understanding of where the crime took place. So, freedoms, guns, troops, warrants, silence, attorney, $20. This is an old one. It's not really used a whole lot anymore, but the original amendment said that you had the right to a jury trial in cases involving more than $20, which would be pretty much anything today. Now, I will say that when we're talking about civil cases are rarely decided by juries today. I think like 1% of juries decide civil cases. So we're talking more probably about criminal cases, but it could be a criminal or a civil trial. Has to be a case involving more than $20. Punishment, that there can be no cruel or unusual punishment. This is an interesting one because, as we'll get into number 10 here in a second, some states still use the death penalty. Should the death penalty be considered cruel or unusual punishment? You know, I guess that depends on where you fall in the morality issue of who gets to take a life. Next one. Unenumerated rights. Unenumerated rights, and if you kind of break that word apart, enumerated or enumerate means it's listed, it's said out loud. So unenumerated rights are anything that's not listed. And so the 9th Amendment basically says that there are more rights than what are listed. They don't have to be all spelled out word for word or exactly as it might unfold. There are more rights than what are listed, and you can't just assume that these 8 beforehand are finite, and those are the only rights that are allowed. And then the last one, we'll go through the other 17 later, but for the Bill of Rights, the last one is state powers. And this is an interesting one. I bring this one up all of the time because this really harkens back to the old Articles of Confederation, that anything not granted, any power not granted to the federal government is reserved to the state government. Now, I would very much say that the federal government has way more power than was ever imagined in 1791. But the 10th Amendment says that state powers have the right to do what they want, that anything that's not, that the federal government does not handle. So for instance, take a look at your driver's license. It's issued by the state of North Dakota or maybe the state of Minnesota. Take a look at, I guess even in our case, where your diploma will be signed. It will be signed from the state of North Dakota. So speed limits is another good example. The speed limit in North Dakota is 75 on the interstate. The speed limit in South Dakota is 80 on the interstate. States get to choose that. When we were going through all the COVID mandates and everything, every state had different requirements. And if you heard, I think probably North Dakota was pretty lax on our mandates that we had during the COVID time, but places like California are still quite strict. In fact, I was in Hawaii and we had to wear masks outside in public areas. And that's the beauty of the 10th Amendment, that state powers get to choose any laws or regulations that is not granted to the federal government. All right, so we're going to stop there. Those are the first 10 amendments: freedoms, guns, troops, warrants, silence, attorney, $20, punishment, unenumerated rights, state powers. We'll go through the next ones later on. Talk to you later.